Welcome to Warblog. Today we're looking at Operation New Life 65. I think that 65 comes from there's an Operation New Life in 1975 as it would appear, and so this differentiates. So presumably it was called Operation New Life, but then after the sort of conflict of a later event, which appears to be more significant, because this is completely sort of insignificant really. It was called, it's titled 65. I mean, essentially this pretty much sums it up. I mean, there's two sources for this. There's the Vietnam operations, and there's also the other book that I've got, which I haven't referred to there. Maybe I should. It's the Vietnam Almanac, James Wilbanks. I should maybe put that in there. It's this one here. I know it's here, so I should copy that and put it into there. So essentially, it's got there's two sources for it. So there's two sort of very short descriptions. The first one pretty much says this is a search and destroy mission and harvest and rice harvest. Well, it's a search and destroy and rice harvest security operation, obviously as it says, across the Binh Tuy Province, which is sort of this area here. It is sort of bounded by maybe a line like that and a line like that. But I'm presuming it's fairly open. As well as a counter-insurgency operation designed to break the hold of the Viet Cong over the area. So, I mean, it's sort of, well, maybe that's the same thing. So what I've done to sort of bring it to life, give it, in some dimension, I've just put these farm units around. So these are completely random, and it's really designed for you to sort of really interpret the mission objective. Now, the thing is, historically there are no engagements. So there's no sort of major battle, but I like to cover all these things. I mean, I could go in there and just search for all the meaty ones, but that's not really what this is all about. So it gives you an idea and a perspective of what was happening, and I mean, obviously it has its limits as a game, but that should give some sort of perspective to it all. But the thing is, there could have been engagements, and there's no reason why there shouldn't have been engagements, but. So essentially, it's not much of a game. It's more of sort of, well, I wonder what will happen, because that is sort of what I'm wondering. I wonder what will happen. I mean, will we be able to sort of secure these farms, or will we be able to secure it as soon as we move away? Will the Viet Cong come in? Will the Viet Cong choose to actually engage some of these forces? With their sort of, much smaller, but still not insignificant infantry units and irregulars. Etc. etc. So now the thing is, there are a few what I call conditional rules. I don't normally put conditional rules in. I've done it a few times, and they're normally advisable. You can play it how you want. I like to be very open on that in the sort of introducing your concept of role play to implement what you consider to be common sense. Common sense can be really easily cover things like supply lines. You can't allow yourself to have your supply lines, cut and things like that. But that's something else really. It's just, what I'm getting to here is that, for example, first off, I haven't put artillery in for the very reason that I'm about to sort of cover. But you've got some air power. The thing is, what I say you can't do, you can't just sort of say, you just can't just say, I'm going to use my air power to start bombing this unit, because in theory you can't see it. So I've put in these recce units, which, I mean, to be quite honest, I think maybe they should just be 007. If you're within 3 hexes of one of these, 1, 2, 3, so that's quite a lot, you can say you've spotted and identified a unit, and you can use air combat on it. So you could sort of zoom up the road, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, get there, and you could actually spot him and bring in an airstrike. So the thing is, to be realistic about things, that's what I would advise. But what I'm more angling at here, to some extent, is the reason I've given this a big map and not a small map is because obviously we've got the print and play functionality now in, and what I'm sort of thinking, one of the problems with the whole Vietnam period is that it's very atypical of a lot of the other engagements, especially when you compare it to the Iran-Iraq war. there were no major battles. Even the Korean War, there were sort of major battles. There were no sort of, there was nothing. I mean, there was virtually nothing above sort of battalion regiment level. It was a very small level search and destroy, skirmish type actions, and the vast majority of the casualties in the Vietnam War from the US side were from small, less than company size engagements. So what I'm getting to here is, if you print and play this, you could put a board up, and you can use hidden movement. So essentially, you would then sort of go, okay, well, you've got this board here, printed out here, and you've got the numbers, and so the Viet Cong player would essentially have hidden movement. And then what I'm saying down here is that the Viet Cong, that the US player would then have to plot his turns out 3 turns ahead. It's up to you to determine how you do this. Now, I will be putting in some more advanced rules for hidden movement on the print and play side of things, because I think it can work. So essentially, it's a bit like the game of battleships, where you might put a board up, and the Viet Cong player can see where the US player is, but the US player can't see where the Viet Cong player is. But the US player has to sort of plot some sort of movement. Now, you can define that as you want. I mean, for example, you might sort of say, well, I'm going to put this unit is going to go from here to here. Now that means that you can't sort of then suddenly start chasing something else because you think there's something there. For example, I can see that's there, so I might sort of just move up here to encounter it, but the thing is, I don't know it's there. So now the thing is, if I was to move along this road, so I'm going to move along this road and come along here. As soon as I got to there, I could see him. The moment I can see him, I can change my movements instantly, so I can start heading for him. So it's not as though I'm bound by those 3 turns. But unless you've got some reason, you should really be defining what you want to do, and that, I think that would replicate and represent the sort of search and destroy process, in that you might sort of say, okay, well, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. I'm not even sure how far you can move through these sort of fields and paddy fields as infantry. But you might sort of say, well, I'm going to go in a straight line up here, but this unit's going to go 1, 2, 3 up to there, and he's going to then go in a straight line, and we're going to develop this 1, 2, 3, this this sort of wave that's going to go up like that. But as soon as we get to here, we might go this way, or we could say, well, we're going to actually, you're going to plot where you're going to go, and then if you come into contact with the Viet Cong, and you can have all sorts of rules in there on the print and play. For example, rolling to see whether or not you can see anyone within sort of 2 hexes. I've also put another rule in there, basically not in jungle. Where did it say that? Yeah, the US air power can only be used when spotted by US recce units, as we described, within 3 hexes of them, but not in jungle. So you can't sit there attacking the Viet Cong stacks regardless of sightings location. So what I'm saying is, if the Viet Cong move into the jungle, you can't spot them. You can't use that ability. You can only spot them when they're in the open. And I'm not saying that this is all exclusively paddy field and this is all exclusively jungle. Like but the thing is, in general, that's the way we do it. And these jungle units, these jungle placements, do represent the real jungle area. I mean, especially this. I think it's almost a national park and very hilly. But it's sort of, they're convenient, really, if you think about it. Sort of, they can sort of sit in the jungle and then come out and operate through the jungle and then come out to the farms, go back in there. Obviously getting through to there might be a long one, but you can cut across there, and it's quite an interesting topography from that point of view. So what I'm saying is, there's quite a scope for this on the print and play side of things. Obviously, the print and play side of things need to have the rules flushed out, which haven't been so far, because it's a new feature. But the thing is, just make your own rules up or interpret it as you want. I mean, hidden movement is in hidden movement, so it's quite simple, really. And you can just sort of say, well, we can't spot the units unless we're sort of within 3 hexes, etc., etc. Now, I have thought of taking this idea even further and having sort of aerial reconnaissance operations, but that's all further down the line. And I think the thing is, with this print and play, it's really brought the Vietnam series, and I did actually update this, into another dimension, because there's, if you look at them, there's over 20. So there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 25 Vietnam scenarios, and all of them you could suddenly start to use this, because in most of them, and a lot of them, it's really, a lot of it is search and destroy, and this is a historic operation, a historic event, and you could sort of you play it actually in a far more entertaining way, whereas before it's always been a bit odd because you can see where they are, sort of go in a beeline for them, and obviously the Viet Cong might then regroup, and you have battle lines, and that's not really the essence of what was happening. The other thing to say, and obviously point out, is that we got some Australian units. Now I don't know the full order of battle, so I'm just really guessing. So we've got elements of the 1st Division, obviously not the entire 1st Division. These aren't mentioned, but I'm putting them in there for that specific reason of spotting. These are the Australian infantry units, but we also have the 173 Airborne. Now they're air mobile, so they come on air mobile. And you've also got the air transport units. To be quite honest, I can't remember how they work. When I set it up, I thought, hang on, how does that actually work? I can't remember. I hope it works, because there are some limitations, but the way this works is you would then deploy these units air mobile, so they're within the air mobile box, and you drag them and you drop them sort of, well, I'm going to drop them here, for example, and they're on the ground, so they've been brought in by helicopters, essentially, air assets. But to remove them, you would need to have these as available units, and I can't remember how to even set them up properly. I'm pretty sure I've set them up properly, but we'll find out. But they can then remove these units from the board and put them back into the available pool, where they're just not instant, so it's a few turns. And so you can accomplish essentially that taking on and off of air mobile units, just as they did in the Vietnam War, which is key. You can do it online, but I think even the print and play is now brings that to a new dimension of much greater degree of versatility in how you do that, because the online play is a bit fiddly and a bit faffy, and it's not particularly intuitive. But the print and play version is there's no such thing as intuitive in that regards. But anyway, I'm going to give it just a quick sort of play. So obviously we can see all the air assets, and we've got the air transport there and whatever. So essentially, again, stating that we can't see anything. I'm just sort of thinking about how I would do this. What I'm going to do, I'm not really going to play much of this, I'm just going to give the overview again. But we've got our sort of things, so let's use a dark blue. We could use a light blue, couldn't we? What's the colour? I mean, what 4 units in there? And to be quite honest, I would sort of maybe think of the thing is, my screen's not big enough for this one line. Fanning out like that, but doing it in a line like that, to cover these sort of angles, so splitting them up in that way. Now that would sort of cover that. We've got the Australian stuff here, the nearest we've got to that. And again, plotting these things. Now, the thing is, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, because this might not be the way I'd want to do it. I'm not saying this is a good strategy. I'm thinking almost aloud. And what I've almost thought is another way of thinking about how to do it, and that would be to join the dots up between the farms. So, for example, we might want to go like this. And then we could determine whether we want to go through the woodland or around it, because then that would cover those, and we could leave these almost in a circular pattern, and then these ones could almost similarly, you know, have a sort of a pattern where they're covering up these. So we've got 1, 2, 3, so 4 companies like this. You know, so each company could almost have its own route. I mean, these two could probably go like this before splitting up, but this one could encompass both of these. I mean, here we've probably got quite a bit. I mean, we could cover all this with one route, and this could be covered with one route. You know, that one could go like this. You know, that would be 1, not 3. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, giving us one spare unit to sort of intermingle between the 3. But you know, that all sounds really great, but the thing is we can't hold the ground. So what that would sort of indicate or infer is, if we use the red for these guys, is that as soon as we've taken this one, for example, if we take this one, well, these units could be could sort of vanish into the jungle. As soon as we pass, and as soon as we're sort of there, they could come out and take the farm back. You know, and this one could come out. This one could come out and take this farm. This one could come out and take this farm. So, you know, it's not sort of, well, once we pass through it, we can clear it. You know, so we've got that to sort of bear in mind. Now, one of the things that will work in the US favour is that the size of their units will mean we'll only have to stop there 1 turn. Well, they'll have to stop there for 3 turns, because it'll go from 1 to 0, no, 2 turns, from 1 to 0, then to -1, etc., or -1 to 0 to 1. So they're going to have to stop there 2 turns. But similarly, you know, we've got the air units, the air mobile units, that can then sort of come in on a predetermined sort of course and cover a secondary patrol. So you might want to say, well, we're going to patrol up and down this road, you know, and that's our plotted course. But the thing is, if you do that, it's going to be quite clear. So you might want to say, well, we're going to plonk a unit here. We've got an LZ here, for example. Let's do it in blue. Let's do it in this colour to represent landing zone there, and he could patrol this road. And you could patrol the roads. You know, I mean, that's not really what the air mobile units are for, but you could sort of say that, because that will give you, you know, a fair amount of recon ability here and there. But you could also maybe say, well, we're just going to use these explicitly to respond to what the to what these guys can see. And you could say, well, okay, we've got 2 of them, so one of these can go up and down the road, and this other one can sort of go, I don't know, I'm thinking sort of a pattern up along this road. So we've got one of these guys, so one of them can go this way. Let's do that again in blue. So one of these recon units can go that way, and the other one can go that way, basically. But you could sort of, you know, do it that way, across here, down here, up there, and this one can go like this, up here, across, you know, whatever sort of pattern that you can almost see there a logical pattern that will sort of get some sort of breadth of coverage, but you might also want to sort of support the recon units with the troops, etc., etc. So essentially the challenge in this game really is to define how you're going to do your search and destroy, and it's really not implicitly about engagement. You've got probably enough to fight the units, and as the Viet Cong, we haven't sort of looked at it from the Viet Cong perspective. I mean, you could look at it from two angles. You could look at it from absolute avoidance, which would be, you could say, well, that's going to reflect the historical outcome. How can I avoid the US? Absolute avoidance, well, with regards, because absolute avoidance, you just remove them from the board. But trying to maintain all these farms as red, trying to maintain control of all the farms. And I would have thought, as I sort of inferred earlier, that you could sort of use these woods as a base. You could use these woods as a base, like that, to hide out in. Obviously, you can see where the jungle areas are, and then sort of spring out. But the US player might say, well, that's obviously a really sort of obvious and simple technique. So you might want to actually say, well, forget everything else. We're going to just land out. We're just going to take out these woods, and we're going to maintain control over these jungle areas. So you might want to sort of focus in a different way. For example, we could say, okay, well, we've drawn up quite a large pattern there, but we might actually want to say, well, we want to make sure they're not going to be coming back, so we can have a sweeping pattern that sort of works more like it's on. Change the colour to blue because I like that for some reason. We could change it from more of a sweeping pattern like this, so we can start off like that, because we know that we've got that line, and so we can go like that, and like that, and then basically do everything we can to maintain visibility across this line. And then say, well, okay, and then once we've achieved that, we're then going to, and you could plot this out in advance. These are your sort of your strategy. We're going to hold this line, and then essentially, well, you could take it out. So you take these two areas next, because that's what that would involve. And then once you've done that, you could take that jungle area out to make sure there's nothing hiding in it, and continually building up a line of defence. So this is different to sweeping, and then sort of come around here, take that, and take the jungle, and then include those areas, and bit by bit, and then sweep down this way to take the jungle area, clearing anything out, and then obviously filtering through these, etc. I mean, you can see the process there, but you could actually have a structured process in which you're actually clearing and taking control, and you're trying to use these units to best ability to actually maintain a sort of a front line, with the continued sort of versatility of being able to call in air power to support that, and possibly air mobile units depending on how much you've got available at the time. And you can say, well, would that work? Could that work? I mean, again, I always want to emphasise it's not a simulation, but you could start, asking questions and say, does this, I don't want to call it a model, does this game, give me enough insight into what was happening and the questions, that, the issues and the problems that they had. And now the thing is, I mean, if you're playing solo, that's fine. If you're playing print and play, when I mean solo, I mean if you're playing sort of on the computer, you can sort of make the rules up as you're going along. I mean, obviously you could be playing solo print and play as well. But what I'm saying is, if you're playing print and play against another person, you get the other dimension of the option for hidden movement, which would actually make that more, it'll give you another dimension to that. I have considered hidden movement on the browser version, but it's just too complex, and I don't think it really would add much in that perspective. I've seen some games quite recently people were playing where they weren't necessarily hidden movement. It was based on the fact that you can't see things until you get close to them. It was just this sort of Napoleonic advance towards two settlements on a wooded ridge, and you couldn't see anything. And then all of a sudden you get next to it, and all of a sudden there's lots of units appearing. I've seen it in so many games, and it just spoils the momentum of the game because people just advance. I've seen it on a couple of these other more modern games, and they just take their tanks up a road, and all of a sudden these anti-tank guns are lying conveniently in ambush somewhere up the road, without any infantry support or anything, and then they start firing. And these are game, when I say game mechanics, they're like game traps. They're conditioning things. I think you call it, railing. When you've got more so when you've got things like the modern more Call of Duty games. That they're all sort of on rails, aren't they? You couldn't really go anywhere else. You can't go left and right, and it's a completely different direction. You can only go forward, and there'll be a trench and a bunker, and then conveniently you've got to just sort of clear that out, and then you get to the next level, and there's some other sort of building with some bad guys in it, and it's not as though you can go around the bunker and just completely ignore it and hit the building from another. It's on rails, and I think quite a few of these sort of hex games are similarly like that. So they'll start off with, I don't want to be too critical of other games because I am, but let's use another colour here. Let's use white, see what that looks like. You could sort of say, well, this is where we're starting, and it would have all these as hidden movement, but the thing is, it would be quite clear that once you play the game once, there's one here. There's a bad guy there with his anti-tank. Not that we've got tanks, but there's his heavy machine gun, whatever. Some units, and he's in there. And as you march your units along, he suddenly appears and attacks. And it's like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because it sounds as though you just plonked him there, and then you take that out, and once you've played it once, they're there, and you can start to actually, play it accordingly. I mean, I've done this myself. I'll play a game and I'll move everything incrementally, just one hex, to figure out where everything is. But once I've been bitten and burnt on where they are, I know where they are, and I can start to actually advance rapidly, knowing that I've got to do this one, and then there's another one here, and there's another one, and then there's this big pillbox that happens to be there, etc. I think you know what I'm talking about. Well, maybe I don't want to track too much from the objectives of this game. So I'm not going to play it anymore because I don't really want to start sort of getting into it. I just thought that there's been a lot of developments in the game recently, and I just wanted to sort of get this video out there covering how those developments impact it, because I thought, well, this is actually quite relevant to all the recent changes. The only other thing to just point out and note is that I've redone the paddy tile. I really want to sit down and actually review all the tiles, because I don't think this agricultural and paddy really complement each other. And so what I might be doing is putting what I call a theme. So I'll have obviously agricultural, clear, hill. I'll have all the normal stuff, but the theme will be Asia, or it could be any sort of theme, Asia, for example, and they will be coloured accordingly. For example, hills in the desert don't necessarily look very hilly. Open in the desert, should be more yellowy. So this is a plain. I mean, you could have plains in sort of the Middle East, but they wouldn't necessarily be this colour. You might have them just as sort of a danker yellow or something. So I mean, I think I'll leave it at that. I'll just point out, not so much point out, but you can see the difference in the two tiles. I mean, obviously it's a lot closer. You can't. I mean, if you go in there now, it's got the new one. So But I just did that. Obviously, it's not difficult to do. But I can never remember really or decide personally whether one thing is better than another. I mean, this blue doesn't look too bad against that green, but when I did it on this, it looked pretty. Yeah, when I first did it on this, it looked pretty stark, but it looks okay there. But these I just did with the brush tool, you know, and they're sort of the intent is to be like that. But I was looking at a map, and it's pretty clear that this is sort of very similar to many of the symbols used for rice fields or paddy fields. This line, if you look closely, you'll see that. And I think it's a little bit more of an improvement. I'm trying to make the hex counters more discreet, you know, and I think that's getting nearer to the mark. I keep trying to get it like desert. I just love this desert. I love that. It's so discreet, but it's so clear. It's yellow. It's, you know, to my mind's eye, the ones in the Middle East, the maps, they just look good. I mean, I know people might sort of argue that and say they look rubbish, you know, for example. But I just really like that. But things like, you know, here it sort of looks okay, but the hills I'm not entirely happy with. You know, I think if they're hills there should be more contours, and one of the things I'm going to try and do there is put in heights. So there'll be hills and then there'll be heights, and heights will reflect strategic areas of significant hill land that if you control you have a significant advantage. The thing is, you know, even that works for me. It just looks good. Whereas a large area of just paddy fields, it doesn't have that same feel. It looks as though there's something lacking on that. I'm not, you know, but the thing is, what I'm trying to get to, I'm going to probably sort of just review all the tiles and then come up with a more sort of integrated design, colour style. But the thing is, I've always put that on the back burner because I can always change that. I mean, I thought, you know, I did this to put it into perspective how easy it is to do. I was going shopping and I was sitting there thinking, going to go to the supermarket, and I thought, hang on, I'll just sit here, just change that tile. And I did it just between sort of getting ready. I was all ready to go out, and I just stopped and looked. I was creating the tile, added it. I thought, oh, that looks better. I did about 2 versions because the other version I wasn't happy with. It looked a bit odd against that blue river. So it's not difficult stuff, but it has, you know, a major impact. I mean, without wanting to get too boring, you can see how many of the maps have changed. You know, from these screenshots. I mean, it doesn't look like that now. You know, there's more texture on these. These are mountains, hills, and desert. Mountains, hills, and desert. It's got that subtle and that's what I'm trying to get to, etc., etc. So anyway, that's Operation New Life 65. Search and destroy. Conterinsurgency. Whether it makes for an exciting and challenging game, we don't know. If you want to find out, then sign up and give it a go, either online or print and play. Alternatively, online against another opponent. I don't really sort of make much of that, but it was actually quite a big development that I never really trumpeted too much about. I just did it, got it out of the way, but I'm not sure whether people realise you can play these online. There's a bit of development to follow up on that, but you know, so there's a lot that you can do, and you might have lots of fun and learn things, etc., etc. Okay, I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.